Before we get started, do we have anybody here from the AG's office?
Good morning, Chairman. Angela Goad on behalf of the Attorney General's office.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ms. Goad. All right. Good morning, everyone. We are on the record in case number 2020-00289, electronic request of Atmos Energy Corporation for modification and extension of its gas cost adjustment performance-based rate-making mechanism. My name is Kent Chandler. I'm chairman of the Kentucky Public Service Commission. I'm joining today virtually by Vice Chair Amy Cubbage and Commissioner Marion Butler. At this time, I would caution attendees to please set your cellular phones to silent mode or turn them off. We are hosting this hearing via video conferencing. As such, I ask that you do the following. Mute your microphone and turn off your video if you are not speaking. If you use a phone for the audio and a computer for the video, turn off the computer audio. If you are in a room with several people on their own computers, turn off the computer audio for all but one computer. If another participant is in a nearby office, close the door between offices. Use wired headphones or wired earbuds for better sound quality and to ensure that wireless does not lose its battery. Keep a charger nearby in case your computer battery runs low. And finally, and most importantly, please alert the Commission if you are experiencing technology failure that prevents your participation at any time in the proceeding. Attorneys should contact staff at the previously provided contact information. The hearing today is for the purpose of taking evidence on Atmos's performance-based rate-making mechanism. At this time, we'll have the entry of appearance of counsel. Given the unique challenges of conducting this hearing virtually, I would ask counsel that after making their own entry of appearance, that they also introduce their witnesses today. For the applicant, Atmos.
I'm Jack Hughes. I'm outside counsel for Atmos Energy. With me today is Kevin Frank, who is Atmos in-house corporate counsel in Dallas. We have two witnesses, Rebecca Buchanan and Trisha Young.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Mr. Frank, I know that you have your request, your pro hoc vice motion is still before the commission. Is that correct?
I know we submitted it. I don't think you've ruled on it, so that's
okay.
That's right.
Thank you. And for the Attorney General's office?
Good morning, Angela Goad on behalf of the Attorney General's office, and we do not have a witness in this case.
Okay. And will you be the only attorney from the Attorney General's office here today, Ms. Goad?
I will be, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. I've been advised, Mr. Hughes, and I've checked the record this morning. Please confirm that the public notice has been given and filed into the record.
It has.
Okay. And I think that it was filed, Tariff Sheets, on January the 19th. There are a few pending motions for confidential treatment. We'll certainly rule on those in a timely fashion. But if Mr. Hughes, Ms. Goad, if we start running into any of those confidential information, please let me know. We'll stop the hearing and go into confidential session. Given that there is the outstanding motion to allow Mr. Frank to participate today under the pro hoc vice, I'll go ahead and approve that motion from the bench. And we'll have an order to follow doing so formally, Mr. Hughes. The only request I make is that you not leave Mr. Frank by himself today in this proceeding, that you stay as co-counsel.
No, I will be here, but Mr. Frank will be presenting our witnesses.
All right, thank you. All right, we, as indicated in the Tariff Sheets, that Atmos has provided public notice was provided, and the public notice noted that public comments could have been made at the beginning of the hearing, and directed those wishing to make public comments, oral comments, to the instructions listed on the Public Service Commission website. The Public Service Commission website had a place on its homepage that had instructions for people to sign up to provide public comments. As of about 5 minutes ago, nobody has signed up. I'll just remind anyone who does watch this live or after the fact prior to the submission of the case that public comments can be filed written public comments can be filed at any time, provided any time during the pendency of a case, and that we ask that if you are going to file a written public comment that you just provide your name, your address, and the case number. In this matter, the case number is 2020-00289. Public comments can be mailed to the Kentucky Public Service Commission at 211 Sauer Boulevard, Frankfort, Kentucky 40601, or they can be emailed to the Public Service Commission at psc.info@ky.gov. There's also a place on our website in which public comments can be submitted. Mr. Hughes, Mr. Frank, Ms. Goad, is there anything that we need to take under consideration before Atmos calls its first witness?
I'm not aware of anything.
I'm not either.
Okay. All right, Mr. Hughes, Mr. Frank, you may call your first witness.
Very well. Atmos Energy's first witness is Rebecca Buchanan.
Okay. Ms. Buchanan, please turn on your camera and your microphone and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Okay. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Rebecca M. Buchanan. My business address is 377 Riverside Drive, Suite 201, Franklin, Tennessee 37064.
Okay. Mr. Frank, you may ask.
Thank you. And Ms. Buchanan, can you please indicate what documents you have in front of you today?
Yes, I have a printed copy of the testimony that I'm about to give. I also have a printed copy of my exhibit that's within the testimony. And I have the email from Mr. Bellamy, I believe, telling us how to connect to the website.
Thank you. Could you please state by whom you were employed and in what capacity?
Sure. And good morning, everyone. I forgot to say that. So I am employed by Atmos Energy Corporation as manager of regional gas supply. And that region covers the states of Tennessee, Virginia, and Kentucky. It's called the Kentucky Mid-States Division Regional Office.
And what are your job responsibilities?
So primarily I'm responsible for the development, implementation, and direction of gas supply procurement and reporting for the Kentucky Mid-States Division of the company, and also this Pbrm program, performance-based rate-making mechanism.
Could you briefly describe your educational background and professional experience?
Sure. I received my Bachelor of Business Administration degree with honors from the University of Oklahoma. I majored in accounting. And my professional experience includes 6 years of corporate accounting outside of the gas industry. And I held the positions of staff accountant, senior accountant, payroll manager, and regional accounting manager. But in 1991, I accepted the position of analyst of regulatory affairs at United Cities Gas Company. And then with the 1997 merger of United Cities and Atmos Energy Corporation, I transferred to the company's rate department, where I was a senior rates analyst until my promotion to manager of regional gas supply in 2007.
Thank you. Ms. Buchanan, what's the purpose of your testimony today?
So the purpose of my testimony is to illustrate the benefits of the PBRM, the performance-based rate-making mechanism, and I'll explain the relationship between the PBRM and the company's long-term gas commodity contracts, and how in the absence of the PBRM, or with substantial modifications of the PBRM, the company may change its long-term commodity purchasing practices.
Excuse me. And what areas of the PBRM will you be testifying to?
So as I mentioned earlier, I am responsible for the operation of the company's gas supply functions in Kentucky, including the PBRM, as well as managing requests for proposals or RFPs. That process we use to enter into the long-term commodity supply arrangements. And then the other component of this will be handled by Tricia Young, which is the negotiating of the pipeline capacity contracts that Atmos enters into to serve the Kentucky operations.
Thank you. So were you involved in the creation of the company's 2020 request to modify the PBRM?
Yes, myself and my department provided the data necessary for the PBRM review. And I was also involved in reviewing the company's request to modify the PBRM filing.
And did that filing quantify the recent benefits of the PBRM?
Yes, it did. The gas purchase savings to the Kentucky customers that were attributable to the PBRM for the 4 years prior to the filing was approximately $15 million. And I do have an exhibit, RMB1, that summarizes the Kentucky PBRM savings from inception of the program in July 1998, through May 2021.
And all of the information in that exhibit was contained in the company's application?
Yes.
And so at a high level for all of us, could you just explain how the PBRM works?
Sure. The PBRM recognizes appropriate benchmark prices for pipeline services and natural gas commodity. And it also recognizes other opportunities to generate revenue that are outside the scope of normal gas supply functions of the gas utilities operations, such as off-system sales and daily capacity recalls and releases. To the extent the company can generate savings below these benchmarks, the savings are shared between the company and the customers. And that exact savings percentage varies depending on the extent of the savings.
And are you aware of whether or not other states have programs comparable to the PBRM?
Yes, in the Kentucky Mid-States Division, since I'm responsible for the gas supply functions in Tennessee, Tennessee has a performance-based incentive mechanism as well. And I'm also aware that the company has incentive programs in other states in which it operates. But fundamentally, they all operate in a similar manner and recognize benchmarks of reasonable cost levels, and then incentivize the ability to achieve savings below those benchmarks.
And how does the company generate savings under its PBRM in Kentucky?
Primarily through discounts on natural gas commodity purchases, discounts on natural gas pipeline transportation rates, segmentation of pipeline capacity, which is included in the reported transportation discount, and fees received from the asset managers for their right to optimize idle pipeline capacity, and those are included in the reported commodity discount. And Kevin, I've also have a table, RMB1, that provides a summary of the results of the company's PBR program for the 4-year period, June 2016 through May 20, that was part of this application. And it breaks down the savings between those areas that I just mentioned.
And all the information in that chart is also included in the company's application in this proceeding, correct?
There was one item called capacity release that we received a data request about. And normally the capacity release revenues are included in transportation discount. And so I went ahead and broke that out because I think staff was interested in the capacity release component. So that's one additional item. It was provided in a data request response.
Okay. And related to that, in the company's initial filing in this proceeding, it appeared there were certain components of the PBRM that the company does not use a lot anymore. Should those be retained?
Yes, that's the off-system sales component and the capacity release component, and they've not been directly used in recent years, but we feel like it should be maintained in case future circumstances support the use in generation of savings within the PBRM. And those components, harm in remaining in the program, and it would be difficult to reinstate in a quick fashion in response to a changing market condition. So we do prefer they remain in.
Okay, I'm going to turn to some of your company's contracting practices and the way they relate to the PBRM, and the pricing involved in those contracts. So why does the company's PBRM use NYMEX index pricing as a component of the benchmark pricing for baseload purchases?
Okay. The use of NYMEX index pricing, it predates my time working with the PBRM. So I can't say why it was initially chosen, but the inclusion of NYMEX does provide a stable trading point tied to our upstream pipelines that service Atmos and specifically Kentucky. The indices specific to the upstream pipelines are not reflective of every point on the pipeline system. So the company purchases much of its gas for Kentucky in the same geographic region in which NYMEX Henry Hub price is established. And I would also say that by incorporating NYMEX index into the price, it provides greater transparency for the transactions underlying the PBRM. And for the company's counterparties, using the NYMEX index to benchmark portions of baseload purchases makes it easier for them to hedge portions of their price risk exposure to the company on their long-term gas supply contracts. And that encourages marketers to submit competitive bids to Atmos Kentucky's RFPs for gas supply and asset management services.
So why is it beneficial for the company's Kentucky customers if marketers can hedge their sales to Atmos Energy?
Well, it's significantly cheaper and easier for marketers to enter into financial hedges at the NYMEX base price than at an index that's price specific to a zone on the pipeline. Rather than having to seek a customized swap, or a marketer could purchase an exchange traded financial product at a lower transaction cost. Marketers routinely hedge portions of their portfolios. Allowing them to do so at a lower cost can result in more competitive offers in response to the company's RFPs, and thus more potential savings for the customers.
And so, do the company's contract pricing terms in their current contracts reflect the current PBRM?
Yes, we specifically require the marketers responding to our RFPs to offer pricing terms that reflect the benchmarks in the PBRM. This allows for easier comparison between the benchmark and the invoices received by the company.
Are the company's contracts with suppliers specifically for the PBRM?
No. Our contracts are not for the PBRM. Rather, the pricing indices of the supply contracts are consistent with the PBRM benchmark indices. For example, natural gas commodity is sold to us at a price based on the average of NYMEX Henry Hub price and inside Ferp index price for baseload purchases, and their price at based on Platts Gas Daily Index price for incremental purchases. This makes the calculations required in the PBRM administratively easier, as it does not require an intermediary step of converting an index price to a fixed dollar amount each month. With the indices being the same as in the PBRM and the same in the supply contract, the commodity savings calculation is just a matter of multiplying the purchase volumes by the discount or premium to index stated in the supply contract. It's a straightforward calculation and requires no interpretation of value.
Okay, Ms. Buchanan, you've mentioned a couple times that these contracts are long-term. Why does the company use long-term contracts for natural gas commodity purchases?
The asset managers do invest a considerable amount of time and effort in evaluating our transportation and storage contracts. Additionally, they derive value from using those assets to offer termed agreements to third-party users or producers of natural gas. Market opportunities may not arise over 1 year. A longer-term agreement gives the potential supplier more certainty that market opportunities will occur during the term of that agreement. The marketer is more likely to commit their time and resources to bid on and offer a greater value for an asset management arrangement that's a multi-year contract. Thus, the value to Kentucky customers is enhanced through longer-term arrangements.
So what is the current term of the company's commodity contract?
Okay, we have two active commodity contracts. One is, we refer to it as the Kentucky-Tennessee Gas Pipeline, or TGP. The RFP for that contract was issued in November of 2019, and the gas supply asset management contract was effective starting April 2020, and that goes through March 31, 2023. The second is Texas Gas TGT. The RFP was issued in July 2020 with the gas supply and asset management contract effective November 20 through October 31, 2023.
And what would happen if the commission were to change the PBRM benchmark pricing prior to the end of those current commodity contracts?
Well, I can't say for sure. The financial impact would depend on whatever the new benchmark price was. However, it could create a scenario where for the remainder of the contract term, the savings calculation may not be an apples to apples basis like we have now. And therefore, it may not reflect the true value of the program. The commodity PBR savings calculated and the resulting sharing may be inequitable, which could negatively impact customers or the company.
And then relating to pricing, do you think that PBRM benchmark gas purchases should be based upon a weighted average of firm pipeline contract entitlements and a simple average of index prices?
No, I don't think that should be. At first glance, it sounds like an innocuous change in the PBR methodology that would more accurately reflect the locations where gas is purchased, but with a deeper review, that's not necessarily true. Contract receipt point entitlements on Texas gas, for example, can exceed the contract maximum daily quantity, or MDQ. Also, contract entitlements reflect a projection of our maximum possible demand, which we refer to as a design day scenario. A receipt point that's only used in a design day scenario should not contribute to a weighted average benchmark price that's used all the time. Also, behind city gate storage, which we have in Kentucky, on system storage, can further skew the amount of the maximum daily quantity held on the pipeline relative to actual purchases. The more behind city gate on system storage we have, the less flowing gas entitlements are needed relative to a design day scenario. And lastly, the use of a simple average of monthly, weekly, daily prices might seem to incentivize the use of all three indices equally in commodity contracts, but historically the company has not used weekly pricing, and we purchase significant amounts of our gas at baseload first of month pricing, which limits price volatility through the month and benefits customers. The weekly and daily benchmark prices have no relevance in a benchmark comparison for our first of month baseload purchases. Additionally, I remind the Commission that in order in case 2010-00353, the Commission believed that Atmos's request to eliminate natural gas week and gas daily indexes is reasonable, given that the remaining two indices were more relevant for the computation of first month baseload purchase benchmarks.
Do you think the existing PBRM is beneficial for Kentucky customers?
Yeah, the PPRM is beneficial for Kentucky customers because it has incentivized and does incentivize the company to continuously seek improvements over Ferp or Federal Energy Regulatory Commission approved cost of service transportation rates, also on wholesale natural gas market prices and the generation of non-traditional revenues. company only shares in PBRM savings if the gas costs incurred are lower than the established prudent benchmark. Natural gas commodity prices have recently experienced increased volatility. Pipeline transportation costs are also less stable, the frequency of interstate pipeline rate cases increasing, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission approving the use of modernization charges and trackers for pipeline modernization programs. Natural gas markets, natural gas markets and upstream pipeline costs are constantly changing. It's beneficial for regulators to maintain programs and incentivize utilities to reduce costs to customers. One cannot wait and be reactive to the market. It would be too late. That's why the PBRM has been in place for decades throughout numerous changes in the gas markets over that time. And the Commission has recognized the value of the PBRM as a long-standing mechanism.
Thank you, Ms. Buchanan. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our direct examination of Ms. Buchanan.
Ms. Goode, do you have any questions for Ms. Buchanan?
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to take a moment to state for the record that the Attorney General's office previously issued 2 rounds of discovery and filed comments into the case with our recommendations. So at this time, we do not have any additional questions. Thank you.
Mr. Bellamy, any questions for Ms. Buchanan?
Yes. Ms. Buchanan, I know you were listed as a witness on the 3rd request for information. You're familiar with the responses to the 1st and 2nd request for information?
Yes,
Is that
I am.
correct? Okay. I'm going to refer, do you have any of those in front of you right now?
We have them available. I do not have them on paper in front of me.
Okay. I can share
They're
my
available
screen.
electronically. Oh, sure, that'd be great.
Okay. Just give me a second, I apologize. And can you all see that? Okay. Now this is the response, Atmos' response to staff's first request for information, item 4D. And the question here, it says, since Atmos' PBR mechanism was established, provide the percentage of total gas costs for which Atmos' purchase price was above the benchmark for that purchase. So I'm scrolling down here to the response here in D, and the answer was the Kentucky PBR calculations on a total gas cost per month, or I'm sorry, the Kentucky PBR program calculates on a total gas cost per month and per annual basis. There have been no months in which the actual gas costs exceeded the benchmark, which is the reasonable prudent cost. The PBR incentivizes the company to achieve gas costs that are lower than the reasonable and prudent level of cost, i.e. generates savings. I guess, do you agree with that statement?
Yes, I wasn't around from inception, but the reported values that I've observed and the values since I've been involved in the PBRM since 2007, I agree with that, yes.
Okay, so I guess my first question is, based on that statement, is it correct that Atmos' intent in establishing the PBR benchmarks is that the benchmarks would represent the reasonably prudent cost of gas?
Yes,
Okay. And Atmos contends that the PBR incentivizes it to achieve results that are lower than the reasonably prudent cost of gas. Is that correct?
yes.
Should the benchmarks of the reasonably prudent cost of gas be based on actual market prices to measure Atmos performance against the market?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
And Atmos's PBR mechanism was adopted in 1998, is that correct?
Yes.
So since 1998, there hasn't been a single month in which Atmos's total gas costs exceeded its benchmark cost. Is that correct? Based on that response?
I'm not sure about a single month. I believe that's true, but I'm not sure, although our savings are calculated on annual basis according to the tariff. So the numbers for sure annually, I believe that's correct.
So, assuming the response in D, which says that there hasn't been a month in which the actual cost exceeded the benchmark, assuming that's correct, that would mean, and assuming the benchmark is supposed to be the market price, that would mean that for the past 20 years, every single month, Atmos has been able to beat the market in its gas purchases for 20 years, correct?
Yes, if it was monthly and for sure on an annual basis, that's correct.
Would that be unusual for a commodity purchaser to be able to beat the market every month for 20 years?
I don't know the experience for others besides Atmos, so I can't say whether it's unusual or not.
Would another explanation for why Atmos was able to beat its benchmarks for every month for 20 years, would another explanation for that simply be that the benchmarks don't necessarily represent the market price of gas in the areas in which Atmos is purchasing gas?
No, I would not say that.
You wouldn't agree with that?
No, I would not agree with that.
So I'm looking at, and I'm just going to read this to you. If you dispute what I'm saying, I'll pull it up on my screen share. So I'm looking at Atmos's response to the AG's first request for information, item 2A.
I'm sorry, could you let me read the
Yeah, go ahead. You can.
question?
Oh, the question.
If you could, yeah, slide back up. I need to see the context. And which subpoint is it B that you're asking about?
A.
Oh, A. Okay. Okay.
You ready to scroll down?
Yes.
Let me know when you're done reading it.
Okay.
Okay, and basically, I'm just going to summarize what that says. It indicates that Atmos recorded PBR savings during the 4-year period of $28.3 million. And with the current sharing percentage in the PBR mechanism, Atmos would have been able to retain $12.89 million of that PBR savings, which represented about 45% of the PBR savings and 4% of the actual cost of gas during that period of $312 million. So I guess my question is it Atmos's contention that that level of sharing, that percentage of sharing is necessary to continue its current efforts to lower the cost of gas on behalf of customers?
Well, certainly in the historic record, the commission has believed that that's an adequate incentivization for the company. And we have proven that that has incentivized us to create savings. So yes, I would strongly recommend that that level of sharing works and that it should be continued.
How has the company proven that the PBR mechanism has generated that level of savings? I understand that the company has beaten the benchmarks, but is there any evidence that the incentives themselves were actually the cause of the company taking actions to beat the benchmarks?
Well, I just know, for one, in my knowledge of how our gas supply and services department works, that that's very upfront in our decision making and how we do our negotiations. And so yes, now you're asking me how can I prove it? I would say the proof is in the results of the program and the savings that it's generated.
But I guess that would assume that the benchmarks are set at the appropriate, or set appropriately, that they actually match the market. Would you agree with that?
Yes, strongly agree with that, yes.
Okay. Are you aware of any kind of studies or anything just generally that indicate that PBR mechanisms actually result in savings for gas cost customers?
I'm not aware of studies. I would imagine there are some out there, but no, I'm not aware of any directly.
Okay. I might ask just as a posting data request if you are aware, if Atmos is aware of any studies that would actually support the fact that PBR mechanisms result in lower cost to utility customers.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first sentence that you said.
Yes, I was just saying I may ask as a post-hearing data request if Atmos is aware of any studies that support the proposition that PBR mechanisms actually result in lower cost to utility customers. I'm looking at Atmos's response to the Attorney General's second request for information, item 6F. And I'll let you read the question.
I can't see it. Could you scroll up, please?
Can you see it?
Not quite. There's a top of it's not visible on my screen.
Okay.
The question itself.
Oh, you mean scroll up here?
Yeah, I'd like to read the question for context. The actual data request.
It should be showing. It's showing on my screen. Do you see it?
Okay, I see it. It starts with request, yes. Hold on. Is there a particular subletter that you
Yeah,
are
number
interested?
or letter F.
Okay, let me read that. Okay.
I'm honestly really just going to ask about the first sentence and the last sentence of the response, but you can read the whole thing and just let me know when you're done.
Okay, yes, if you don't mind, just give me a minute. Okay.
So the first sentence there, it says saving share to customer and share to Atmos Energy are a function of the math built in the Kentucky PBR mechanism. And then it talks about the percentage shares And then it talks about how the total cost has dropped the total cost of gas has dropped from 148 million in June 2006 to May 2007, and then now 65 million in June 2015 to May 2016. But the savings has increased over that same period, or it did increase. Could you kind of explain some of the factors causing the total gas cost to drop during that period between the year ending in 2007 and the year ending in 2016?
What caused the total cost to drop?
Yes.
You know, that, I was just joining the gas supply department in 2007. So I can't say, without looking at the reports and the different components behind the report, to say exactly why total cost dropped. I mean, there could be various reasons. And
Let me just ask you,
if we responded to that in a data request response or not.
let me just ask you just generally, was between those periods, was there anything that happened? Did the general cost of gas during that period in the market as a whole drop? Or do you think that that drop in the cost is something that's specific to Atmos?
I could not say, but as we all know, the prices have fluctuated. If we're talking about commodity cost of gas has fluctuated widely over time. And I just am not sure in 06, 07 compared to 15, 16, and all the in-between years, the prices could go up and down. And I believe, I can't remember, are we looking at just the commodity component, or is this the total savings of the program? So if it was total savings, it would also involve transportation costs on the interstate pipelines, which also change over time with their rate cases.
Okay, I think it was that was largely just about the overall total cost of gas, but I think I understand your response.
And it goes up and down, so without me able to look at specifics for those years, I could not say for sure.
Okay, I'm looking at, I apologize, Atmos's response to staff's first request for information. And it's item 2A. I'll pull it up for you. And I honestly don't have an in-depth question about this. I was really just going to refer to this so you knew the context. I might just ask the question. If you want to read it before you answer, I'll let you do that. But basically that response there, it describes a, quote, relatively recent form of capacity utilization between Atmos energy utility divisions called segmentation. And then describes the pipeline segmentation resulted in transportation savings being identified for both Atmos Mississippi and Atmos Kentucky. And the question is just, could you state when pipeline segmentation first began?
For Atmos,
Yes.
I believe I provided a chart in response that itemized the segmentation by year. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what year that began, but it is in one of our data request responses by year, including the savings generated each.
And I think I might have that here. Does 2012 sound correct?
It probably is around that time.
And I'm actually going to pull that response up here in just a second. But I guess the other question that kind of goes along with that segmentation question, could you describe what pipeline segmentation is, and then the source of the savings it provides? And while you're doing that, I'm going to pull up that chart you were just talking about.
Okay. So as it relates to Kentucky, we have another Atmos division, Mississippi division, and they hold a pipeline contract that has receipts in the producer zone, and they have a very long distance contract, and the deliveries go all the way up to Kentucky. And that segment of pipeline capacity can be broken into, for us, two pieces, so that the Mississippi division uses that length of pipeline from the southern region to Mississippi. And then for Kentucky, we use that same contract, but we pick up the supply in the mid-range of that distance and take the supply up to Kentucky. The interstate pipeline only charges us for one contract for that full length. And because we've segmented, we can break the price of that contract in half so that Kentucky only pays 50%, say, compared to if we went to the pipeline and bought a contract specifically for Kentucky from the producer region to Kentucky. And it's a way to share the cost between two different jurisdictions. And the Mississippi jurisdiction customers also only get half the cost that they normally would. So we both benefit, and both customers in both jurisdictions benefit.
How do you decide what portion of the cost of the segmentation is assigned to which utility division between the Mississippi and the Kentucky?
I believe we've always split it 50-50.
And
because we're both benefiting from that contract.
so you split the savings 50-50. Is the capacity split 50-50 too?
The only part that's split is the capacity that we get the cost for that amount. That's split.
Okay. And this, I think this is the chart you were talking about.
I feel like there was one that gave a monthly breakdown with dollars.
And I think that might be attachment 1 there. It's talking about attachment 1. Let's see. Is this it?
Yes, that's it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So with respect to the segmentation, this obviously shows it started in 2012, and then you've continued to do it. And in 2012, it looks like the percentage, the segmentation resulted in about 165,000 in transportation savings in 2012, out of a total of 2.6 million in transportation savings, or PBR savings.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you look at that one more time? The top.
Yeah.
Annual transport savings. Okay, yes, that would be the line item on the PBR report where we report total transportation savings. Yes,
Sure.
I agree.
And so it was about 6%, and then the segmentation savings in, I guess, 2018, 2019 has increased to about 30%. I guess, are you segmenting more? How is that segmentation savings increasing over that period?
Yes. Now, I can't remember exactly back in 2012, but right now we have 3 different contracts that we segment on 3 different pipelines. So we have a Texas Gas segmented contract. We have an ANR, which is another pipeline segmented contract, and a Tennessee Gas Pipeline, or TGP, segmented contract. So now we have 3, and I'm just supposing that back in the first year, maybe we only had 1 of those that we were segmenting, or that Mississippi was segmenting with us. So it was all new to us back then, and we weren't sure how it was going to work and if other pipelines would allow us to do that. And Ms. Young can also talk to this. This is more in her wheelhouse, the capacity, but I am very aware of this chart. I helped put this together.
And does Atmos expect to report transportation savings in perpetuity related to pipeline segmentation?
No, that decision is made almost on an annual basis. The segmentation, we set it up for a year, usually about a year at a time. I believe they review that, make sure that it's still going to be beneficial. And again, that would be great for Tricia, Ms. Young, to discuss more detail.
And I might just save, I have a couple more questions, but I think I'll save it for her.
Okay.
I'm looking back at Atmos's response to staff's first request for information. Item 4E.
Ooh, 1998.
I'm sorry, I'll let you.
Let me read E.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, and obviously E says, explain whether Atmos believes the PBR mechanism is still necessary in the current low-cost natural gas environment for Kentucky local distribution companies generally and Atmos specifically. And then I'll scroll down here to the response for you. And I was really just asking about one sentence.
Would it be okay if I read the whole thing
Yeah, go ahead.
first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I'm finished reading it.
Okay. Well, it says there, I think, kind of midway down, it says the PBR mechanism generates value by incentivizing the company to seek out ways to more fully utilize transportation and storage assets that are idle but needed for the utility to meet design day demand. So I guess the first question, just generally speaking, how does Atmos determine the transportation capacity and storage assets that are needed to meet design day demand? How does that process work?
Okay, so this is more in Tricia Young's testimony, but I certainly can speak to it.
Well, I can wait and ask this of her if she would be able to answer it better.
Okay, I don't know if she can answer it better, but she can also answer it. But I would like to just say that generally we buy capacity for a design day scenario so that we have enough capacity to serve the customers on the coldest day. And therefore, such as in the summer, you may not be needing that capacity and that would be considered idle.
So could you just briefly, design day, what do you mean by that? I mean, I think I know, but I just wanted to get your...
Yeah, and again, and when Ms. Young gets on, if I misspeak, I'll let her correct me. But design day is, just on very basic terms, the coldest day that you expect. And the highest load that you expect in the winter.
So it's basically the peak demand day?
It's beyond a peak day, so a peak day might just be the coldest day that you had last year. So the design day is the coldest day that you expect looking back historically over many years. And with our customer base being residential, commercial, small industrial customers that we have to serve on a firm basis, we want to be prepared to serve them on that coldest day that, is expected. So that's the amount of capacity that we hold in the winter. And some of that is year-round capacity just by the nature of the pipeline contracts. And therefore, you would have idle capacity in the summer or at non-peak times.
And maybe all these questions are better for Ms. Young, and you cut me off if this is the case, because I don't think we need to.
Sorry.
I don't really want to go over them twice. In fact, I might just skip these and then ask Ms. Young, and maybe if she can't answer, I can call you back after that. But I don't think I need to ask you all both the same questions.
Fair.
Mr. Bellamy, is this a good time to take a short recess?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. We'll take a short recess and come back at Mr. Frank Miscode at 10:10. We'll take an 8-minute recess. 2020-00289. Mr. Bellamy, if you'd like to continue. Oh, I want to make sure that Ms. Buchanan is here. There we go. All right, Mr. Bellamy?
Can you hear me, Ms. Buchanan?
Yes, I can.
I was just going to stop sharing my screen for a second here. You kind of talked about this earlier in your direct testimony, but Atmos obtains its gas by entering into long-term contracts with asset managers to supply gas at a specified rate over the term of the contract, correct?
That's paraphrasing a little bit differently than I would.
How would you paraphrase it?
Yes, long-term contract. The contract terms contain the index price that we're buying the gas at and an adder or discount, not the exact rate.
Oh, yeah, I meant by a specified rate, I meant a rate that's in the contract. And you kind of went to my next question, which is the rate that's in the contract is normally a rate that's indexed based off of the NYMEX price and the inside Ferp price for the supply area from which the gas is being obtained. Is that correct?
Yes, the average of the two, that is the pricing that we use for our baseload first month purchases.
And then for the baseload first of the month purchases, it'll be the RFPs that you receive from the asset managers will be some amount less or plus that average amount, correct?
The bid that they gave in the RFP that ultimately became the contract with them, yes, it's the average for first of the month baseload. It's the average of NYMEX and then inside for index price and then plus or minus the discount or premium.
Okay. And Atmos evaluates the bids and determines which one's the lowest, and then that's the one that you would typically accept, assuming that this is a reliable supplier and things like that.
Yes, what you're saying is true. There's more factors than just price. But in my department, we do evaluate the bids and select the one that's the best value.
And all else being equal, price would be the deciding factor, basically.
Correct.
Okay. As part of the asset management contracts, Atmos let me back up a little bit. Atmos enters into the transportation and storage contracts on its own with the pipelines, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me.
And when it requests bids from the asset managers, it identifies the firm transportation entitlements that it has on the various pipelines, provides that information to the asset managers. Is that correct?
In the bids, it's to whoever's interested in reading our RFP, it's presented to them. Yes, and that would become part of the contract.
And then Atmos transfers its storage and transportation entitlement on the pipelines to the asset manager providing the gas supply on a particular pipeline. Is that correct?
Yes, we release our contracts to them to serve on our behalf.
Okay. And then to the extent that the storage and transportation capacity that Atmos released to the asset manager isn't necessary to supply Atmos, the asset manager is permitted to release the capacity and then retain the revenue it receives from releasing that capacity. Is that correct?
They're allowed to optimize the idle capacity in whatever way they see fit, as long as they serve our customers first and foremost.
Okay. So as long as they're serving your customers and providing the necessary supply according to the contract, any additional transportation and storage capacity that's not necessary to serve Atmos, they're allowed to, you say optimize, but basically they're allowed to release it for revenue to third parties. Is that correct?
If that is the way they choose to optimize, there's other things they could do with that as well.
Well, what are the other types of things they could do? I was curious about what you meant by optimize.
Sure. Just one example is they may have a municipal that's located in Kentucky as well, that's on the same path as our capacity, and perhaps they serve that municipal as well. So we could use our idle capacity to help serve the needs of another party.
Okay.
That's just an example. I have no direct knowledge of that.
Sure. But basically they're using that capacity to serve someone else, and then perhaps that allows them to generate more revenue because they don't have to then purchase capacity to serve that party, correct?
That would be one way of optimizing, yes.
To the extent that the asset managers bid gas prices at a discount from the NYMEX and the inside Ferp prices, is it your understanding that they do this, at least in part, based on the revenue or that they'll receive from releasing storage and transportation capacity that Atmos assigned to them? Basically, they're providing the discount in part because they're able to use Atmos's excess storage and transportation capacity to quote unquote optimize their operations, either by releasing the revenue, releasing the capacity, or using it to serve a third party.
Or even something else that I haven't even imagined, some other way that they can optimize. I'm not a marketer. I don't know how they calculate their value, but yes, the discount is can be for the value of optimizing the released capacity to them.
This is on page 4 in the report, and I'm just going to read it to you really quick. This is a report that was filed with the application, this matter. It just says, hence, potential suppliers were assured of the opportunity to, it's talking about asset managers. Potential suppliers were assured of the opportunity to supply Atmos's large firm market for 3 to 5 years, plus additional opportunity to leverage Atmos's substantial transportation capacity and storage assets beyond the actual physical supply requirements of that market. When it's talking about storage and transportation capacity and storage assets beyond the actual supply of the market, what is that referring to?
I'm not so sure about the use of the word market, but that's referring to the Kentucky customers served by Atmos.
Okay. So
That is, if I'm understanding the sentence that you just read.
So does Atmos obtain more transportation and storage capacity than is necessary to serve Kentucky customers and then release that to the asset managers?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Is there anything in the PBR tariff, or is there any kind of mechanism in the PBR tariff that would prevent Atmos from purchasing transportation and storage capacity beyond what's necessary to meet Kentucky's needs to generate additional gas cost discounts from an asset manager?
I am not aware of anything in the tariff. I would have to say subject to check whether there's a margin requirement in the state of Kentucky, but certainly that is something the company looks at annually, on an annual basis, to ensure that we don't hold more capacity than is needed to serve the design day needs of the Kentucky customers.
And that was kind of the question I was getting at earlier that we kind of passed off to Ms. Young. What does Atmos do to ensure that it's not obtaining transportation capacity and storage assets in excess of what's necessary to serve Kentucky customers' design day?
Yes, that's Tricia's, that would be part of her testimony.
Oh, so I should refer to her for that?
Yeah, that's directly what she does for us.
Okay. Just, and this might be her too, but does Atmos have any kind of internal controls to ensure that that kind of activity doesn't occur?
Yes, as I just mentioned, we have at least an annual review and often more frequently to compare our design day needs to our capacity. And again, yes, Tricia would be able to speak further on that.
And when I asked if there was anything in the tariff to prevent that, you mentioned you weren't sure if there was what did you say? You weren't sure if there was a margin requirement, or what were you referring to?
Yes, I am aware of some state tariffs. For example, in Tennessee, I believe, they have a 7.5% stated margin where you may obtain pipeline capacity greater than your design day by 7.5%.
Okay.
Sort of a margin of error, I believe.
So that's included in the tariff. It basically limits the ability to obtain savings if you get transportation capacity beyond a certain point.
It is in that. I'm not familiar with that in Kentucky.
I might
I'm saying
just
it's not familiar.
And I know there were some previous questions, and I don't know if the Tennessee tariff was part of this, but as just a post-hearing data request, I'm just going to ask that Atmos file its PBR tariff for Tennessee. Would you be able to provide that?
I think that is in there, but of course, yes.
Okay. And if it's in there, I might take that out of the post-hearing data request. I just don't know off the top of my head. So I'm referring, this stuff might be in Ms. Young's wheelhouse, but I'm going to ask you to look at, it's attachment 1 that was provided in response to the third request for information, item 2. And I'm going to share my screen with you. So I know you responded to this request for information, but I'm thinking that maybe Ms. Young might, be able to answer some of these questions. But I did want to ask you, because this is honestly more about the commodity cost of gas. Are you familiar with this attachment that was provided in response to staff's third request for information?
Yes, I am.
Okay. In this document, there's two. There's attachment 1 and then attachment 2. And this document, this is attachment 1. It basically summarized the contractual transportation and storage entitlements that Atmos has on the Texas gas transmission pipeline, the Trunkline pipeline, and the A&R pipeline. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I'm just looking here at the Texas one because they're on separate tabs here. And attachment 2 had the Tennessee pipeline, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes,
And it's the same type of information?
correct.
Okay, so I'm looking at the Texas gas, this first contract here, just as an example. And it says rate schedule NNS, and this is on the Texas pipeline. And then you have here the contract demand of 43,500. And I'll ask Ms. Young about what those values mean and things. But are you familiar with what these mean here, the receipt points?
Yes.
And what are the receipt points?
That is the location on the pipeline capacity contract where we receive, where the gas supply is received.
Okay. And then, so these are all, and these are nominated receipt points. So this is under the gas supply contract. These are the points in which you're allowed to take gas on a given day under the contract with the Texas gas pipeline, correct?
That is the primary receipt points.
Okay. So, and then over here, I believe these are the amounts you're allowed to take in the given periods. Is that correct?
Yes, you couldn't take them all at once, but those are the ones we can select from.
And then it has here, it says zone. And obviously this is a Texas gas transmission pipeline. So then these are the zones on the Texas gas transmission pipeline where those receipt points are located, correct?
Yes.
So on this contract, the bulk of them are in zone SL, which is the southern Louisiana zone. Is that correct? And I can ask where these are located from Ms. Young if she would be better.
There are more options from the SL zone.
I'm sorry? Oh, yeah.
I'm acknowledging, yes, there's more options of points and capacity from the SL zone than zone 1 on this particular listing.
Okay. And then just scrolling down, this is the other contract. It looks like it's split to some degree between zone 1 and zone SL. And then this one, you got zone 1, zone SL, and then 1 and zone 4. And zone 4 is just another segment of the Tennessee gas transmission pipeline, correct?
Yes, it's a zone on Texas. This is Texas gas.
Okay. And then, I'm not going to go through all of them. I think, but basically, then those values represent the zones where the receipt points are located. So you would receive the gas there. And then the other column over here, which is the primary delivery point, those are the, I guess, the points that connect to Atmos systems where you all would take the gas from the pipeline, correct?
Yes, in Kentucky.
And each of those zones represents a distinct portion or a distinct segment of the Texas gas transmission pipeline, correct?
Yes.
So I'm going to just pull up, let me see. Just give me a second, I apologize. Are you familiar with the benchmarks used for I can pull up the tariff if you want, but for base load purchases, the benchmarks used for purchases on the Texas gas transmission pipeline are the NYMEX price and then the inside Ferp price for zone 1 of the Texas pipeline. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why, given that it seems that the bulk of the gas would be coming from zone SL, would the inside FERC benchmark for zone SL represent a better or worse benchmark? Does Atmos have any position on that? Or do you?
The zone 1 is where we actually have our contract purchase point. So that's where we're actually paying for the gas is in the zone 1. So we're mirroring the benchmark in the PBR with the contract point. So we're actually buying gas at zone 1.
So you're talking about the price. Zone 1 is where the delivery points are, correct? Not the receipt points?
Zone 1 is the beginning point on our pipeline capacity, so we refer that just like right here on this sheet in front of us. Zone 1 is the receipt point on our contracts with the pipeline, so it's the beginning point. And that is the point on our commodity asset management and gas supply agreements with the supplier. That's the point where we buy the gas. The vast majority of our gas is bought at zone 1.
Well, I guess I'm a little bit confused. The receipt point, though, is the point at which that's actually where you're receiving gas, meaning if someone's supplying you gas, the receipt point would be the point at which that supplier where you would receive the gas from the supplier. Is that not correct?
Because we release our capacity, as you referred to, transferred our capacity to the asset manager, they have a lot of flexibility to pick up the supply into that pipeline according to what they think is best. And they actually move the gas on the pipeline to our delivery meters and in Kentucky. As long as they make that gas show up in Kentucky, they have flexibility to use the receipt points that work for them. The commodity contract is set at Texas Gas Zone 1 to match the PBRM.
And I understand that, but Kentucky customers are paying the cost of the transportation capacity down to zone SL, at least for the receipt points in zone SL, are they not?
The demand charges reflect the full receipt and delivery path. There is a capacity utilization discount that the supplier asset manager provides that offsets that total cost in the full scheme of things.
So, Ms. Buchanan, does it offset it in its entirety or to just a degree?
Does the capacity utilization offset the demand charge entirely?
Yeah,
Is that the question?
for the cost of the demand charge being for the entire length all the way down to SL, as opposed for it being a smaller.
No, they don't. No, it does not offset entirely. If it did that, we would have no transportation cost at all.
But I guess what I'm asking is, is the company maintaining that Atmos Kentucky requires that capacity all the way down to the SL receipt point? Is that correct?
Yes.
The SL receipt point, is that the company is maintaining that it requires the capacity for exclusively its Kentucky operations all the way to SL?
Respectfully, I would suggest that Ms. Young answer that. That is directly in her area of responsibility.
Thank you.
Sure. Just kind of switching gears a little bit, could you kind of explain how the Inside FERP publication determines the first of the month price for the various, I guess, zones? All right, let me back up. The Inside FERP, it provides a first of the month price and it provides gas date, or Inside FERP provides the first of the month price, correct? And it provides it, obviously not at every receipt or delivery point. It provides it for various zones or supply areas on various pipelines. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And are you familiar with the zones in which Inside Ferc reports prices?
Just generally familiar, if I look at the publication and I can see, 50 whatever points on there, I don't know all of them.
Do you know whether or not Inside Ferc has a first of the month price for the Texas Gas Transmission Pipeline Zone SL?
I am not sure whether they do or not.
Okay. And I'm going to ask a follow-up on that in a second, but can you explain how does Inside Ferc determine the first of the month price that it reports?
I will answer on a very high level, broad understanding that the parties report to them who are making deals at these trading locations. They're reporting to them the prices, and the publication compiles all that data and then puts it back into a readable format so we can all see what the market is bearing.
What is the Inside Ferc first of the month price? Is that based on the price on the first day of the month, or is it based on the prices in the week leading up to the first of the month?
I'm not sure the exact timing. It's reported first of month, but I believe they gather that those deals are made several days in advance. Again, I have a high level understanding of it. We could look at the publication. I believe they state on the front of their publication their methodology.
And that's what I was somewhat getting at. Does it's Platts is the publisher of Inside Ferc, is that correct?
Yeah, so it may even be S&P Platts.
And they also, it's the same S&P Platts also publish Gas Daily, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what are the Gas Daily prices based on, do you know?
It's a similar concept. I believe it's the day before the deals are being made, and then they're published the following day, toward the end of that day, after the trading's done and the reports are in.
And as I understand it, S&P and Platts have a methodology document that explains their methodology for how they calculate the Inside Ferc and the Gas Daily price. Are you aware of that document?
Yeah.
Yes. And does that document also list the various supply locations in which they offer prices?
I believe it does.
Okay. Just as a post-hearing data request, I'm just going to ask that Atmos provide the most recent methodology published by S&P and Platts with respect to the Inside Ferc and Gas Daily prices, along with the zones in which they offer the prices. And I don't want to waste a lot of time going through these, but I think as a post-hearing data request, it might be easier. I'm going to just ask the receipt points. We went through the receipt points for the Texas Gas Transmission Pipeline, and I think they're listed by zone, but some of the others just have the receipt points without necessarily the zone. To the extent that those attachments don't include the zone, I'm going to ask just a post-hearing data request, just to identify where the receipt points and then which zone or which supply area they would be located in. Would you understand that?
I feel fairly confident that the zones or the locations of each individual pipeline is stated.
Okay.
But I would be glad to clarify that if it's necessary.
Okay. And I'm going to share my screen again. I was just going to ask, in response to AG's first request, item 2, Atmos provided some of the tariff sheets, and I just wanted to take a look at them, just ask a couple questions about the tariff sheets themselves. And these are the current tariff sheets. Are you familiar with the tariff sheets for
Yes.
the PBR mechanism? Okay. So I'm looking at tariff sheet 20. I was going to look at tariff sheet 22. And this is talking, just explaining the delivery area index factor for base load purchases. And I guess I was somewhat confused because you have another benchmark above for base load purchases that's different than this, or it might be the same actually, but I just wanted, just generally speaking, what types of purchases would be benchmarked against this delivered area index factor for base load?
Okay. The tariff states that this is for purchases made by the company when we fully utilized our pipeline quantity entitlements on a daily basis, and which are for delivery to our city gates. So if we've exceeded the entitlements on the pipeline and we need more gas, for example, which doesn't happen very often, but if we were, we could get a delivered supply from a supplier or asset manager. And this is the benchmark that would be used against that delivered supply.
Would this gas be like something that's purchased on a daily basis?
Generally, we would just buy it one day at a time in a period of critical need.
So basically, if your need exceeds what you plan for in your firm entitlements, that's when this factor would come into play?
Correct.
And I guess I'm a little bit confused then as why it's referred to as the delivery index for base load. Would that be a base load purchase?
I'm sorry, I believe there's also one for the swing. I think this is in here just, as a placeholder. I don't know that we've ever used a base load delivered service. I'm trying to think.
I mean, if it's exceeding firm entitlement.
I'll tell you what, there is one in the summer. We have a delivered supply service to an East Diamond storage facility, and we don't hold sufficient A&R capacity to inject into that facility in the summer. So we have a delivered service, and whatever we pay for that delivered supply gas is, this benchmark would be used for it. That probably would be a base load amount.
So are these, you're doing it over the summer, but you have no firm transportation capacity to actually fill that need?
We don't have sufficient capacity. If we're speaking about the example that I used, we don't have sufficient capacity on A&R to to inject into East Diamond and serve our customers in Kentucky at the same time. So there's a summer delivered service for that injection.
And is this something that you bid like first of the month and then it's delivered over the month, or like you said, is this daily?
This is part of, within the asset management agreement, it's already prearranged that they would provide a summer delivered service at a contract price.
Okay. I guess, and I understand that they might be spelled out in the asset management agreements, but as far as how you are then calculating the PBR savings, I'm trying to clarify how that works with the language in the tariff. And so you mentioned the swing load supply, and that's, mentioned down here on, let's see, I guess page 23 and 24. Or starting on page 23, I suppose. Actually, I apologize. Can you kind of distinguish for me, because based on what I'm reading here, you've got swing load supply within firm transportation entitlements and then swing load supply outside of firm transportation entitlements. So
Yes.
Explain to me what the swing load purchases are.
Okay. That is incremental supply that's needed over and above a first of month base load gas purchase.
And would that be, so those would be daily purchases?
Yes, swing load is incremental daily purchases.
But they would still be within the firm transportation entitlements?
Correct. Let me read which one we're looking at here. Yes, it looks like we're looking at just the normal swing incremental supply that, within our contract entitlements for capacity.
If they're in, if these swing load purchasers are within the firm transportation entitlements, and then there's base load purchases within the firm transportation entitlements, how do you distinguish based on the language of this tariff between the base load purchases within firm transportation entitlements and the swing load purchases within firm transportation entitlements?
The base load purchases are made 5 days before the month begins. And we lock in a set purchase quantity that is fixed each day of the month. And then the swing load purchases are made the day before the day of flow. Those decisions are made on a daily basis for the swing load.
Okay. I guess, is that explained anywhere in the tariff that you're aware of?
How base load and swing load?
Are distinguished?
I don't think it's in the tariff, but that's fairly common terminology in gas supply throughout the industry.
Just coming right back up here to this delivered supply. You've got two benchmarks that you're averaging. You have I-1 as the average New York Mercantile Exchange settled closing price. I guess I was a little confused. Is that, what is the average? My understanding was that the settled closing price, is that at the end of the month? And I was confused at what the average would be referring to.
That's just the way it's described in their publication. It's the NYMEX price
Okay.
that we're all familiar with.
And then on I-2, you've got the Inside Ferp gas market report, first of the month posting for the index associated with the delivered supply. And so are you using the index price for the zone in which Atmos, in which the gas is delivered to Atmos?
If I look up at the top of your page, I see it says ANR 2, mainline 2, or zone 3, and I believe those are the delivery zones, I believe. That's where the gas is delivered in 2 or 3.
What's the basis for the distinction of the delivered zone versus above with the these benchmarks, have specific indexes that are listed?
I'm sorry, could you restate the question?
Yeah, I guess. What's the basis for the distinction between the benchmarks used in the SAIBL and then the SIBL here on page 21, and the benchmarks used below for the DAIBL?
Okay, the S, the supply area base load, is the first of month base load purchases within our transportation contractual entitlements. And then the delivery area base load would be when we don't hold the pipeline capacity and we have a delivered supply arrangement with the asset manager, such as that summer injection service on ANR that I spoke about just a few minutes ago. That's a delivered supply service, so the delivered base load benchmark would be used for that.
Okay, and I had one more question about just some terminology in here.
It's a lot.
I'm sorry, let me find the spot. Well, I guess, let me just ask you generally, there's the third component of the commodity cost, which is just the discounts provided by the asset manager. Could you explain that component? The discounts that are not related to the actual cost of gas being bid.
Discounts that are not related to the gas being bid? Is there a way you can describe that for me?
Yeah, I'm sorry, this thing's just not working. Okay, I guess what I'm talking about is the gas acquisition index factor for asset management, which is defined right here. And I guess I just wanted you to kind of explain that in more detail of what that's referring to.
Sure. Thank you for clarifying that. So when the parties bid on our gas supply and asset management arrangements, they have the option to bid a fixed capacity utilization credit. That's completely up to them if they want to, put that in their bid or not. And that is again related to that optimization of idle capacity. And so they can put a fixed credit on our invoice every month for the right to optimize that idle capacity. And they do. Both of our contracts currently have that.
Okay. I didn't have any other questions.
Vice Chair?
Yeah, I just have one kind of generic question. And I say generic to kind of distinguish it from some of these more granular questions about the tariff and the mechanism. I understand that this mechanism, the PBRM, is about 24 years old. And that in all of those 24 years, apparently Atmos has never paid more than the benchmark. And there have been a lot of market changes. So I just want to make sure I understand. It is Atmos's position that in that 24 years, nothing has changed such that a few tweaks to this couldn't make it better for the customers.
The tariff has changed over time at our request, and I'm sure also the staff has had some input into that as well. So there have been some changes over the years. It is my understanding, looking at our historical values, that on an annual basis, total gas costs have been below the benchmark in every year.
Okay, has the benchmark changed the way it's calculated?
We're going back a long time that I don't have direct knowledge of, and I would think it may have changed over the years. It's not changed since 2007. We had some minor adjustments in between then and now to pick up, I think, another pipeline where we got capacity that benchmark maybe was adjusted. So we've tried to keep it relevant to where we're buying gas without messing with the tariff too much.
Okay, thank you, that's all I've got.
Commissioner Butler, any questions?
No questions.
Just have a very few. In your direct testimony, you were talking in one of your responses about how other states have PBRs, other states of which Atmos operates. But I took from your response that you only explicitly mentioned Tennessee. Is that correct?
And I mentioned that one because that's actually in my area of responsibility for the Kentucky Mid-States Division, and that's the one I would be most familiar with.
Okay, and so the Kentucky Mid-States Division only includes Kentucky and Tennessee?
And Virginia.
Does Virginia have a PBR?
It does not.
Do you know if Mississippi has a PBR?
I believe they have some form of a PBR. I'm not familiar with the details of it.
Okay, so if we asked as a post-hearing data request which states that Atmos operates in which Atmos has a PBR, would the company be able to provide that?
I remember that there was a data request for that, so it should be in the record already, and we can help find that.
Okay.
That's to clarify.
One of the things you discussed, I think maybe in your direct testimony, were around transportation costs related to trackers or modernization riders. You remember that?
Yes.
All right, and what was that comment about, costs and trackers and modernization riders that are approved through Ferp?
I would feel better about this if that question was fielded with Ms. Young. She's our capacity and pipeline witness.
Right, but I mean, it was your testimony. I'm just curious if you could restate what it was you were discussing with regard to costs and trackers and modernization riders. What point it was you were trying to make with your testimony?
Yes, at a very high level, my understanding is that some pipelines are putting in cost trackers where their rates would be adjusted more frequently than historically. And I believe that's what we were referring to.
Okay. And at a high level, is it that Atmos has a concern about the increased cost that those trackers or modernization riders lead to?
We do not have that, to my knowledge, in our in the pipelines that serve Kentucky. So certainly that could be something in the future, but at this time there are none that I'm aware of.
Okay, so I guess I'm confused. So Tennessee and Tennessee, A&R, and Texas are the three pipelines that we're discussing. Is that correct?
Those are the primary ones. There's a few others.
Okay. So when you were talking about the increased rates and increased rate cases, or the increased rates as a result of trackers and modernization riders, you're saying that's not applicable to any of the three pipelines that you're aware of that serve Atmos, Kentucky?
There have been increased rates. There have been rate cases, but specifically about the modernization tracker, I don't believe any of our current pipelines have that.
Okay.
Ms. Young can correct me if I
Yeah,
misspoken.
I'm just trying to sort of get better context with what you were, when you mentioned them in your direct testimony, what it was you were trying to address as it relates to this filing. The cost for the capacity with the segmentation or the segmenting is split 50-50 between Kentucky and Mississippi, or Kentucky Mid-States and Mississippi?
The split is for the segment between Kentucky and Mississippi.
Okay. So Kentucky and Mississippi, do you know what the utilization of that capacity is if the cost is being split 50-50?
The demand cost is being split. And I'm not exactly sure if it's 50-50, but that's my recollection. Yes, the demand is being split.
Right, so the cost of it is being split. What's the actual utilization of it? I mean, what's the throughput that each Mississippi and Kentucky represent of that total demand that's being paid for?
Yes, I'm not familiar with the total throughput. Even for our own, I'd have to look back because, as you know, throughput changes by season, by month, by day. So I don't know what the full utilization is.
So are you aware of if the utilization tracks the allocation of the costs?
The only cost that we split is the fixed demand, and it's not based on utilization. Each state pays for their own exact utilization. So whatever we use, we pay for on the commodity component of pipeline cost.
Okay. And do you know what the basis of that split is? Like, is that by contract or by agreement? Do you know if that's in the company's cost allocation manual that it files with the commission? I'm just curious if you know what what's on paper that splits that cost 50-50?
The release rate is actually made through the pipeline bulletin boards, so it's an actual formal capacity release transaction. I don't know how else to better put it to you, and the rate is in that release rate that you would get half of the cost of that demand.
So you all aren't splitting the cost. You're actually, Kentucky and Mississippi are getting two separate bills, and each bill represents half the cost.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Mr. Frank, Mr. Hughes, any redirect to Ms. Buchanan?
Yes, Chairman, just a few things I want to try and clear up on the record. I'll try to be brief. Ms. Buchanan, the segmented releases that you and the chairman were just talking about, do you know if those are publicly available on pipeline bulletin boards?
Yes, they are.
Okay. I wanted to maybe go back to some of Mr. Bellamy's questions and just clear up some of the comments on re-release. Do you remember when Mr. Bellamy was asking you about whether or not the asset managers could release the capacity that we have released to them?
Yes,
Are they allowed to re-release that capacity to third parties?
they are.
Okay, subject to check, is it possible that the capacity releases to the asset managers do not allow re-release as posted on the electronic bulletin boards?
Sure. Yes.
So, again, the asset managers are allowed to optimize the capacity or use it to generate revenue, but they're not allowed to actually release the contract to another entity.
I would have to do subject to check, Kevin.
Okay. I wanted to maybe touch on where we receive gas. You and Mr. Bellamy were discussing about that. Are you familiar with Ferp's shipper must have title policy?
Yes,
Okay. So, where does the company take legal title to the gas the asset managers sell?
in Kentucky, at our city gates.
And if we did not release the contracts to the asset managers, where would we take legal title to the gas we bought?
At that beginning point on the capacity, the receipt point on those pipeline contracts.
Okay, and you and Mr. Bellamy had a couple questions about our primary receipt point entitlements. Do you recall talking about zones SL and zone 1 on Texas Gas?
Yes,
Okay. Commodity charges on a pipeline, are those based on zone?
it's based on the path in some cases, but yes, generally it is zonal based from point A to point B.
And so the more zones you, I'm sorry, do you pay a higher commodity charge if you go through more zones?
You can, or distance, a longer distance.
Okay. And then I want to go back to actually the very first set of questions that Mr. Bellamy was asking you about staff data request 1-04, and about, he asked you about how every month the company's gas prices never exceeded benchmarks. Have the company's gas prices ever exceeded the benchmark prices on any day?
Yes, they have.
Okay, and then how is the company's gas cost compared to the benchmarks? Are any adjustments made to it?
We get the discount or premium, in some cases a premium that the contract indicates. And then we discuss that capacity utilization credit. That also adjusts the gas cost savings.
Okay, so that, if I'm understanding, the asset management payment, the capacity utilization credit is reflected in our gas cost.
Oh, yes, in the commodity component. Mm-hmm.
So if we paid above the benchmark price, but the capacity utilization credit took it below the benchmark price, it would appear that we beat the benchmark price that day.
Yes, because the benchmark is all encompassing of all three of those factors.
Okay. If the company did not have those asset management arrangements in place, in your opinion, could you just call up marketers and get that pricing for gas in the market on any given day?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my redirect for Ms. Buchanan.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Buchanan. We're going to take a short recess, but we ask, given Mr. Bellamy's comments earlier, that he's going to attempt to try to ask Ms. Young some of the questions that he had initially asked you, that you stick around in case we need to recall you.
Thank you.
Okay. So it is 11:13 Eastern. We're going to take a, we'll try to get back here by 11:20, give ourselves 7 minutes, take a short recess, and start again at 11:20. All right. Anthony, there we go. Can you hear us, Vice Chair, Commissioner Butler? Great. All right, we're back on the record in case number 2020-00289, electronic request of Atmos Energy Corporation for modification and extension of its gas cost adjustment performance-based rate-making mechanism. If that's not a mouthful, I don't know what is. Mr. Frank, Mr. Hughes, do you have additional witnesses today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Atmos Energy's second witness is Tricia Young.
All right, Ms. Young, if you will turn on your camera, turn on your microphone, and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Okay. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Tricia Young, and my business address is 1100 Poydras Street, Suite 3400 in New Orleans, Louisiana, and 70163.
Okay. Mr. Frank, you may ask.
Thank you. Ms. Young, can you please indicate what documents, if any, you have in front of you today?
Yes, I have my prepared testimony and one sheet that shows our current contracts in the Kentucky area.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Young, by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm Director of Gas Supply Planning and Contract Administration for Atmos Energy Corporation.
And what are your job responsibilities?
I'm primarily responsible for forecasting natural gas usage, securing upstream transportation and storage contracts, and overseeing our gas supply contract administration group.
Thank you. Could you please briefly describe your educational background and professional experience?
I received my Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from Louisiana Tech University and a Master's of Business Administration from University of Houston. Before Atmos, I worked for a number of pipeline companies from the late 1990s until 2016, where I was hired by Atmos Energy Corporation and had successive roles, increasing responsibility in the gas supply department.
Thank you. And what is the purpose of your testimony today?
The primary purpose of my testimony is to explain the manner in which the company determines what pipeline capacity to hold and negotiates discounts for that capacity when possible, and explain how the entitlements we hold today are reflective of the performance-based rate-making mechanism, the PBRM. And I'll also briefly address the effects of the increased pipeline rate case activity at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and how that affects the PBRM.
Okay, Ms. Young, I think we're going to hopefully get to some questions here that cover some topics of interest. How does the company determine the amount of pipeline entitlements it holds?
Okay, so we base, the company bases its analysis on our forecast of peak demand for our distribution system. And then after taking behind the city gate storage withdrawal capabilities into account, that indicates what our maximum daily quantity, or MDQ, is necessary to meet those peak day demands or design day demands.
And the methodology you use to do this in Kentucky, is that comparable to the methodology you use in other states?
Correct. We use the same methodology, linear regression model across the entire footprint of Atmos.
Okay. So once you've determined the amount of pipeline entitlements to hold, how do you choose what primary receipt point entitlements to put on or seek on those contracts?
So first and foremost, the pipeline capacity needs to be available from a receipt point, and there needs to be available meter capacity at that receipt point in order for us to contract for it. We consider the availability of that commodity supply at the locations with available pipeline capacity. And in general, we strive to lengthen our in-path transportation entitlements within the pricing zones to enhance their value. And it also gives us more locations to source gas from reliably without increasing our demand charges.
So are those primary receipt point entitlements on the contracts reflective of where the company would buy natural gas?
No. The primary receipt point entitlements are reflective of where the company would purchase gas if we had a design day scenario
where it needs to purchase the full MDQ to serve our customers. Most days do not approach that design day level of demand, which means the company can choose to be selective and choose from across its entitlements where the best locations to source gas are on that day.
Okay, what is the typical contract length of a transportation or storage agreement?
The typical length of our Atmos Energy's transportation storage contract is anywhere between 3 and 5 years. Some of our contractual arrangements are on an evergreen or annual type status. Notice to terminate those contracts typically must be provided well in advance, often 6 months and sometimes even a year in advance. So, for example, it could potentially be necessary to provide notice to terminate a contract or a portion of a contract MDQ on March 31 of 2022 for a contract that was terminating on April 1st of 2023. And occasionally, in very rare instances that I'm aware of, pipelines will negotiate shorter notice periods on a case-by-case basis.
If the PBRM was discontinued in its entirety, would that change the way you evaluate what pipeline capacity and receipt point entitlements to hold?
Yes. So we would no longer be incentivized to hold capacity at locations with significant commodity price risk against that relevant index price. Currently, we accept that price risk in exchange for the opportunity to generate savings against the benchmark. And certain of our entitlements are at locations with greater supply price volatility, and we would likely seek to make changes.
Are any of those points with greater supply price volatility that you referenced, or are any of those related to the segmented contracts?
Yes.
Switching gears and maybe talking about pipeline discounts,
Mm-hmm.
how does the company negotiate its pipeline discounted contracts?
So we look to see how much available capacity a pipeline has. We look for similar discounts that other parties receive. We look at the evaluation of the underlying capacity, and we also have to make sure that we qualify for a discount under the Ferp pipeline discount policy. And it really requires us to demonstrate to a pipeline that it can generate more revenue by accepting less than its approved tariff rates and not be at risk for granting us that discount in its next rate proceedings. We also have to convince the pipeline that it cannot sell that capacity for more money to someone else.
You referenced FERC's pipeline discount policy. Can you briefly explain what your understanding of that FERC discount policy is?
Yes, my understanding is that not for the discount, the customer would not sign the contract with the pipeline, and the increased revenue to the pipeline is net beneficial for the other pipeline customers. You usually have to have a competitive alternative in order to demonstrate the need for that discount. Competitive alternatives could be a connection to an alternate pipeline, a delivered service from a third party, a capacity release, or segmentation.
And a moment ago, you referenced that you have to convince the pipelines they're not at risk for granting you a discount in their next rate proceeding. How has the FERC pipeline rate case environment changed in your time in the industry?
So my career in the pipeline industry began right around the same time as the PBRM was created. And back then, pipelines tended to file fewer rate cases, and as a result, those rates were stable for longer periods of time. With the discovery of new sources of natural gas that changed the billing determinants, the southern zone to some of those longer haul pipelines. And also, FERC formally allowed capacity release in 2008, which enabled shippers to potentially use idle capacity without having to take new service from the pipeline. And more recently, FERC has allowed pipelines to have a modernization tracker, and that allows for annual investment in pipeline improvements to be reflected in rates without an intervening rate case. And this has made pipeline rates more dynamic than ever, and it's more challenging when considering all of these variables to consider when making decisions about signing long-term interstate pipeline transportation storage contracts.
And so if you signed a long-term transportation contract and that pipeline subsequently instituted a modernization tracker, would you have to pay those charges?
Yes.
So from your perspective, in your role as it relates to pipeline capacity, how does the existing PBRM provide benefits for Kentucky customers as they're, for pipeline charges?
So, pipeline charges are fundamentally different than commodity cost. Unlike natural gas, which is traded on an unregulated wholesale marketplace, pipelines have a cost of service rates that are set by Ferp and approved by Ferp. And except in limited situations where a distribution system is connected to multiple pipelines, there's typically a single possible source of gas for that distribution system. So encouraging utilities to find innovative ways to achieve discounts from the cost of service rates that was approved, it's very beneficial for its customers.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this concludes our direct examination of Ms. Young.
Mr. Bellamy, or I'm sorry, Ms. Goode, any questions for Ms. Young?
No questions.
Mr. Bellamy?
Yes, Ms. Young, I just had a couple of questions. I'm gonna pull up the spreadsheet that I discussed with Ms. Bachman. I was just gonna ask a couple of questions about this really quick. Sorry.
Okay.
Let me see. So, the contract demand here for winter, it's 4,350. Is that the total amount that Atmos can take off the pipeline at its delivery point that's listed over here in the contract?
Correct.
Okay.
That's our we can take up to 43,500 on a primary basis to our zone 2 deduct, correct?
And just, this contract, I guess, is a little different. The rate NNS that's a combined storage and transportation contract, is that correct?
Correct, it's a no notice service type contract.
So, so the 4,350 is what you can take off in the winter at the delivery point. And then down here, the nominated daily quantity, that's the amount, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the amount that Atmos can receive at the various nominated receipt points, correct? On a daily basis?
Yes.
And then the unnominated daily quantity, let's see, again here for winter, it's 18,212. That's the amount that Atmos on a daily basis can take out of its storage on the pipeline, correct?
Correct.
So the sum of this the sum of the nominated daily quantity for winter and the unnominated daily quantity for winter would be equal to this contract demand price up above. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the nominated daily quantities under these transportation contracts, the receipt point is the point at which Atmos can take the gas from a third party under this transportation contract, correct?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, the receipt points that are listed there, those are the points at which Atmos can take gas. Atmos would buy gas from a supplier and at one of these receipt points, take it at one of those receipt points, and then they can transport it across the transmission line to Atmos's delivery point at the other end, correct?
Correct. Those are our primary receipt point allowances.
And there was a question that was asked, I think, earlier about the pricing for the commodity for the transportation costs, not the demand, but the commodity costs. Does the commodity cost change based on the number or is the commodity cost based on the route that the gas takes? So the gas you're taking in at the receipt point and then the gas you're taking out at the delivery point, the location of those 2 points, does that determine the commodity cost you're paying on the pipeline?
Correct.
And if the gas has to travel, I guess, further or between multiple zones from the point of receipt to the point of delivery, does that increase the commodity costs on the pipeline?
Yes, the SL, the longer the path or the longer the zone, it is more, that price is larger, correct?
And in this PBR case, Atmos provided calculations of the transportation cost savings. They calculated their savings as compared to benchmarks, or for both the commodity cost of gas and then also the transportation discounts. When Atmos calculates the transportation discounts, are they using or when you calculate the transportation discounts, are you using these contract receipt points to calculate the actual cost and also the tariff cost to determine the difference between the two benchmarks?
I believe that's a question for Becky.
Okay. I might just ask that as a post-hearing data request, and I'll just ask to show how the transportation cost discounts specifically are calculated with respect to the routes taken on the pipelines. Because my question was basically to figure out if are Kentucky customers paying for the full route, or are they paying for the route from zone 1? There was a mention of that earlier. Are you familiar with the locations of, like on this pipeline, it says Zone SL. That's in southern Louisiana, correct?
That is correct.
And I know there might be some branches and things, but generally the Texas gas transmission pipeline travels from southern Louisiana up through Kentucky and maybe beyond. I don't know where it ends.
Correct. I think they have, correct. It generally goes from South Louisiana to Kentucky. I do believe they have a little bit in Illinois.
And it kind of moves up, so it's the southern Louisiana, then you have zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and zone 4. Is that correct? Kind of moving north?
Correct.
In your direct testimony, you mentioned how Atmos determines the pipeline capacity. And I'm assuming that you're talking about both transportation and storage capacity, how much Atmos will obtain.
Yes.
And you said that's based on the full design day, which is the peak demand day, your projected peak demand day, and that's how you determine how much transportation capacity and storage capacity to purchase. Is that correct?
For the pipeline capacity, yes.
And I guess I just wanted a little more detail. Are you saying it's based on the design day, or do you literally project the peak demand day and you literally, get that exact amount?
So, at the end of the winter, my team does a design day statistical analysis where we predict how much gas an area would utilize on the coldest day that could happen in a 30-year period. We work with outside consultants to make sure that our methods are statistically sound. And we go out and we contract for capacity to be able to ensure that we put together our gas plan to ensure that we can meet those design day needs. so that on the coldest day that could happen, that we have enough transportation capacity to be able to serve our customers.
And when you say, my question really is, is there some sort of like, and this probably is the wrong term, but basically some sort of reserve margin where you're projecting a design day of, X, and we're gonna, in order to ensure that we meet that, we're gonna, make sure that we get, transportation capacity, including the effects of your storage being able to reduce the design day. Is there some percentage that you look at, beyond, what you would need to meet your design day?
So because our contracts scale out for 3 to 5 years, and our design day volumes, or our design day needs can change on a year-to-year basis, depending on what areas are growing, there is an inherent reserve margin in those numbers.
Do you know what the typical reserve margin has been for Kentucky's distribution system?
I believe, I would have to go back and look. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, but it would be, I would be more comfortable going back and look.
Okay, well, I'll ask a post-hearing data request for the, probably ask for the design day for the last several years, and also in, what you purchased and then the reserve margin that you used and why. Do you also do the purchases for Tennessee's distribution system?
I don't do any of the purchases, but I do my team does the design day calculations, and we do secure the transportation contracts for the rest of the enterprise, yes.
And a previous witness had mentioned, let me just stop sharing my screen, something's like flashing. The previous witness had mentioned that Tennessee's PBR mechanism had a limitation on the extent to which you could purchase transportation capacity beyond design day. Does that affect, or how does that affect your decisions in purchasing transportation and storage capacity for Tennessee as compared to Kentucky?
It doesn't. We use the same methodology. So we've got the same design day numbers, and then we go out and contract for the capacity that best meets the needs of that area. And if it is a growing area, and we know that in the next few, we know it's a growing area in the next few years, we feel as though there's going to be more capacity that is needed. We may we'll make sure that our long-term contracts are able to meet those growing needs.
Okay, I didn't have any other questions. Thank you so much.
Vice Chair, do you have any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Butler?
No questions.
All right, Mr. Frank, do you have any redirect, Ms. Young?
No, I do not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And is there any reason, Mr. Bellamy, that Ms. Young cannot be excused?
No.
Okay. All right, thank you for being here today, Ms. Young. You may be excused for the remainder of the hearing. Does commission staff wish to recall Ms. Buchanan?
No.
Okay. Ms. Go, do you wish to recall Ms. Buchanan?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, Mr. Frank, do you have any additional witnesses?
No, we do not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Bellamy, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. All of the documents that you pulled up on the screen today are all data requests that are already in the record. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. And there's no need to make any of those exhibits?
I don't believe so.
All right. All right, Mr. Frank, Ms. Go, do you have any motions that we need to take under submission now?
I do not.
Okay.
We do not.
Okay. And Mr. Bellamy, will you have post-hearing data requests, it sounded like?
Yes. I could probably get them out next Wednesday.
Okay. So we'll have a post-hearing procedural schedule out by close of business tomorrow that sets forth the dates that we're about to discuss. But Mr. Bellamy thinks that he can have those data requests filed on behalf of staff by Wednesday, February the 2nd. Is that right, Mr. Bellamy? Mr. Frank, how many days would you like? Would you like do we have an opportunity to provide Atmos 2 full weeks to provide that response?
Yes.
Okay. So 2 weeks, Mr. Frank, would be Wednesday the 16th. How about that?
That's fine.
Okay, so post-hearing data requests on February the 2nd with the responses due February the 16th. It's my understanding that the parties have already, to Ms. Gode's point earlier, I guess briefed or commented on the open case, but given that we have today a hearing and a significant amount of additional evidence that's been entered into the case, I do want to provide an opportunity for the parties to comment, either to provide arguments or legal positions on the additional evidence that we've had today. Mr. Frank, you have the burden in this case, as it's your tariff. So I'll just ask, do you have a preference for a responsive briefing where Atmos would file an initial brief where the AG's office would respond and Atmos would have an opportunity to reply, or would you all prefer to take the shorter route, probably lead us to have an order earlier, and the parties file simultaneous initial comments or briefs with responsive briefs filed after that? Each party would be able to file responsive briefs.
I would actually refer that question to my co-counsel, Mr. Hughes.
I think we would prefer the brief response and a reply.
Okay, so that's what we'll do. The evidence will be closed on the 16th. Mr. Frank, Mr. Hughes, you'll know what your new evidence is before the rest of us. Will you all be able to have a brief due, let's say, February the 18th? Should be approximately 3 weeks from tomorrow.
Speaking for Atmos, we can. I hope staff and the Attorney General, they may need more time, but that works for us.
Well, so you all will be filing an initial brief, and of course the AG's office will have an opportunity, shortly thereafter to file a response brief. So it'll just be Atmos that will be filing that initial brief proposed on the 18th. Do you have any objection, Mr. Hughes?
None.
No, that's him.
Okay, so the initial brief by Atmos on 2/18. Ms. Goode, how about Monday, February the 28th? That's 10 days for a response brief.
That's perfectly fine. Thank you.
And Mr. Hughes, let's say March the 7th for a reply. Give you 5 working days.
I think that's fine.
All right, so we'll have a post-hearing procedural schedule out tomorrow, where post-hearing data requests will be asked by staff February the 2nd to be responded to on the 16th. Atmos's initial brief will be due on February the 18th. Response brief, if the AG's office chooses to file one, will be on February the 28th. With the reply brief, should a response brief be filed, due on the 7th. I would just like to make clear, because I think it's important, that I don't think there's an expectation that the briefs should be limited to the new evidence. I do think the parties should be able to brief or comment on the entirety of the record that's going to be under the submission to the commission. As I noted earlier, Mr. Frank, we'll formally put an order out on your motion for Pro Hoc BJ, and we'll try to get to the confidentiality petitions in short order. I know that there's a related petition or motion in a different case, 2021-430, related to this, about the implementation of PBR during the pendency of this case. I'll just say we're aware of that and take that motion under consideration. Is there anything else, Mr. Hughes, Mr. Frank, Ms. Go, that we need to take under consideration today?
I'm not aware of anything.
Not at this time.
Okay. All right. Hearing nothing else, thank you all for being here today, and have a nice remainder of your day. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.